Wind moved through the empty street like a low prayer, tugging the noose so it creaked against the crossbeam. Sheriff Kane stood below the gallows with frost whitening the boards and the breath from his horse, ghosting in the pale light. The cowboy he'd dragged out of a storm only hours before hung slack now, boots tilted, spurs holding tiny suns of ice. Rope bruised the neck a sick violet. Two crows watched from the courthouse roof, black as spilled ink against a bruised sky. Kane's silver badge spun once between his fingers and caught the thin dawn, then stilled. "God's mercy," the undertaker whispered, hat crushed against his chest. "He weren't here at midnight. I'd have heard the trap." Kane said nothing. He let the cold bite until it sharpened thought. Hemp and lie and wet dust. The town hadn't yet found its noise. Only a door latch somewhere and the distant clank of a stove lid. Farther off, the jailhouse stove breathed a thin plume through its crooked pipe. The law sat warm, the law's handiwork froze on a hook. Footsteps scraped behind him. Deputy Rafe Dwyer came up with his coat collar high and his mouth already set in a line that asked to be believed. The man's star shone bright as a coin. "Ugly business, Sheriff. Must have done it himself. Shame ain't a light load." Kane looked at the knot. Not a hangman's slip. Not even the practical noose used by trail hands to hobble mules. This one had been worked quick but clever, the kind a drover from double-bar country tied without looking. The frayed tag end was waxed to keep it from unlaying. He leaned close. The fibers smelled faintly of tallow and coal smoke, as if they'd lived a spell in a livery stove room. "Suicides don't grease the pin," Kane said. He bent, ran a gloved fingertip over the iron axle of the trap hinge. Somebody didn't want this squealing in the night. Dwyer gave a quiet snort. Or the last fella who used it liked a smooth drop. The last fella swung at the spring carnival, and I heard it squeal like a pig. Kane let his badge fall back against his chest. The ghost of last night, the rain slashing sideways, the cowboy's blood thin with water, flashed along the edges of his mind, then guttered. He kept it there, at the rim, where it hinted without speaking. The story of the saving belonged to the next page. This morning was about the rope. A few townsfolk had gathered, shopkeepers in aprons, the smith's boy with soot on his cheeks, a woman hugging her shawl tight. The child peered around her skirts, wide-eyed at the still boots above. Someone coughed, one. Another murmured, "Ought to cut him down." "No," came a second voice, brittle. "Leave him. Lesson's a lesson." Kane didn't turn. "Miller," he said to the undertaker, "fetch your ladder and sheets." Dwyer shifted. "Sheriff, Judge Hollis always signs off before we—" "The judge ain't the law. The law is the law." Kane's voice was even, the metal buried in it well-oiled. "We're treating this right." At the name, the crowd parted as Judge Pike Hollis strode into the pale light with a wool scarf looped like a verdict. He had a rancher's hand in town cloth and eyes polished by other men's secrets. Behind him moved Elias Barrow and two foremen, hats low, freckled with frost, the dust of money on their boots. Hollis pretended to shiver for effect. Sheriff, deputy. Terrible sight. For a man to hang himself on public wood, well, that's a sin of spectacle. Kane finally looked up at the cowboy's face. Under frost, there was a question in the eyes that death hadn't finished closing. He stepped onto the platform. Frost cracked faintly under his weight. He studied the jawline, the broken cartilage, the rope's bite. He slid two fingers into the shirt collar and frowned. A smear of gray on the underside of the throat, cinder grit, like from a stove broom, or from a gloved hand that handled coal before handling men. "You knew him?" Hollis called. Kane felt the wind put its hand against his cheek and thought of a boy's empty bed, a woman's hair ribbon like dusk. He swallowed hard enough to hear it. Name he gave was Cole Avery. Rode alone. Barrow spat into the frost. Rode alone, stole alone, swung alone. That's the way of it. Kane's Colt sat heavy at his hip. Pearl grip cold as water. He said to the undertaker, "Cut him down, careful." To the crowd, he added without looking, "Anyone puts a hand to that rope before I say, I'll break it off and send it home in their pocket." The words were not loud. They didn't need to be. Miller scrambled up, hands shaking on the ladder rails. He sawed the rope through and eased the body down into Kane's waiting arms. The weight hit like a sentence. The crowd flinched as a spur kissed wood and rang once. Kane knelt, laid Cole flat, opened one stiff hand. Something clicked against the boards. An iron script token, thumb worn, Hollis Mercantile, payable in goods. He turned it. With the tip of a glove, a smear of dried pitch clung to the edge. Hollis's voice stayed smooth. "Sheriff, I trust you'll deliver the body to Mr. Miller. My office will arrange an inquiry to spare the town its nerves." Kane pinched a thread from under Cole's nail. Black horsehair, fine, oiled. The judge's bay wore such a polish. So did Barrow's stallion. That proved little. This was a town where horses were a currency, and hair went everywhere, like lies. Dwyer crouched opposite. "You see what you want to see, Sheriff. Storm last night drove every fool indoors. If Cole wanted to quit the world, nobody would have stopped him. Man was likely guilty of something. They always are." "Who's they?" Kane asked softly. He watched Dwyer's eyes measure him, count steps, inventory doors. "Strays," Dwyer said. "Drifters, the kind you save to feel noble." A murmur rolled the crowd. The smith's boy said too loud. "Sheriff pulled him off the flats, risked himself." A quick hand cuffed the boy's shoulder, quiet. Hollis set his scarf to rights. If there's to be talk, best it be in chambers, not in the street like a fish stall. Kane stood. Frost had wet the knees of his duster. He looked at the rope's free end, at the shaved pin that turned without a groan, at the fresh block-and-tackle marks on the beam. The gallows was a toy for certain men, and someone had oiled its laughter. He stared up into the cold and felt something old and iron stir behind his ribs. His badge turned with a soft click against the brass of his vest. "Law ain't always justice," he said, and the line of the morning altered. "But justice rides with me." The undertaker looked at the judge, then the sheriff, deciding which star had the brighter future. Hollis's smile didn't falter, but his eyes flattened. "Careful, Kane. This town wants quiet." "Quiet is what a rope makes after the drop," Kane said. "I'll take truth instead." He lifted the collar again, sniffed. Not whiskey, not fear sweat alone. Coal oil, faint as a rumor. The livery kept its lamp barrels in the back of Mercer's barn. Kane pictured the place. Blue paint flaking on the door frame, Prussian-shaded chips that clung to a man's coat when he brushed it careless. He checked the cowboy's sleeve hem and found a flake, the color of a winter sky. Small, telling. He felt the first thread of a trail under his fingers. "Deputy," he said, eyes still on the flake. "After Miller lays him out, seal the body in the back cell. I don't want hands on him." "The jail," Dwyer said, tone bright with disbelief. "He's a corpse, not a prisoner." "He's evidence," Kane answered. Barrow took a step, breath smoking. That's an insult to the town, Sheriff. To leave a dead man where drunks piss and dice clatter. The cell's clean this morning, Kane said. Cleaner than the street. Hollis twitched the scarf tight. You'll do as you like, I see. But remember, the gallows isn't just timber. It's order. Undermine it, and you undermine me. That landed the way it was meant to, plain as a threat. Some heads nodded. Others pretended not to hear. Kane lifted the body with Miller and carried it the 20 yards to the jailhouse. Floorboards complained under their weight. Keys chimed. The back cell was cold and tidy, iron bars chalked with the scars of long nights. He laid Cole on the cot. Miller's breath fogged once like a soul, then steadied. He crossed himself with hands that smelled of sawdust and death. Alone with the dead and his thoughts, Kane took a last long look. There, at the corner of the mouth, a fleck of wax, yellow, scented faintly of bay. Hollis's barber used bay rum wax on the judge's mustache, and every man who aped him. He scraped the fleck into a matchbox and snapped it shut. From the front room came voices layered like cordwood, Dwyer's low drawl, Barrow's rasp, the judge's smooth stone. Another voice, too, the scared quick-up of the Smith's boy, hushed at once. Kane stepped to the door. His hand lingered on the jamb. He could walk out a policeman, shrug this as a storm-drowned drifter with a weak neck and a heavy conscience, and the town would breathe easier. Or he could pull on a thread and see which men unraveled. Something in him that still bled answered for him. He opened the door. The morning had brightened to a pale coin. Outside, Dwyer stood with his back to the room, one shoulder cocked, like a man easing a sore. His right hand was buried in his coat pocket. It didn't take a seer to know a thumb lay against a hammer. "You're set on stirring mud," Dwyer said without turning. "Judge thinks we should let the man be. So do I." Kane stepped onto the threshold. "Then you can both think from the porch while I do my job." Barrow chuckled, far from amused. "You sure you want this fight, Kane? Bridges burn hotter than stove coal." Kane's eyes were winter steel. "I'll cross what I burn." He took a single step into the street. A breeze rattled the gallows chain. The crows rose and cut a black seam through the cold. Far down the alley by Mercer's livery, a figure moved, too quick to be casual, coat hem flashing blue paint dust as it brushed a door. Kane angled his head that way, and the movement in Dwyer's pocket stilled, then shifted. A quiet click came from under the deputy's coat. The sound was tiny, but Kane heard it like thunder. "Careful, Sheriff," Dwyer said, finally turning, his eyes flat as slate. "You've seen enough." The hammer finished cocking. The street held its breath, and the wind pushed a torn scrap of rope across Kane's boot, whispering promises of last night's storm and everything it had kept hidden. The storm came sideways, rain like thrown nails, wind shoving the mesquite flat to the ground. Sheriff Kane rode hunched in his duster, hat brim streaming, the world reduced to flashes of white fire and the black between. Thunder stampeded the sky. He'd been riding fence out past Mercer's livery when the first shout split the weather. Raw, afraid, a man whose throat knew ropes. He reined toward it without thinking. Some sounds bypassed choice. Lightning tore the dark and showed the whole tableau in a single blue-white engraving. A cottonwood bent double, 3 masked riders in oilskins, and a 4th man on a crate beneath a noose, hands tied, face slick with rain and blood. The knot had the neatness of practice. The crate rocked as the wind shuddered through. "Evening, boys," Kane called over the storm, voice level as a plumb line. "Drop iron and live to see breakfast." Guns turned first. The men weren't drunk. They moved like men who'd done this before. The closest raised a Winchester. Kane's Colt cleared leather on instinct. 2 shots cracked almost together. The rifleman spun into the mud. A second man broke for the horses. A third kicked the crate. Kane spurred straight in, rain stinging like grit. The crate lurched. The rope snapped tight with a sound like a pulled pig sign. The man's boots clawed for air. Kane fired once at the rope and missed. Wind stole the bullet sideways. He threw himself from the saddle, hit hard, felt his wrist bark, came up with his bowie. One savage rake up the rope's belly, and it parted. The hanged man slammed to earth, a sack of breath, and rolled to his side, coughing knives. The last rider raked him with buckshot. Splinters leapt from the cottonwood. Bark slapped Kane's cheek in hot lines. He shot back from a knee, and the buckshot man folded like wet canvas. The runner had mounted and was already a smear in the rain, pounding for town. Kane cut the bound man's hands. They were cold and clumsy under the blade. Lightning fenced the sky again, and he saw the face, a rangy cowboy with a bad split over one eye, and rope burns livid at his throat. He was younger than the voice that had cried out. "You Cole Avery?" Kane asked. The man flinched at the name. "Depends who's asking." "Sheriff," Kane said, and held up his silver star in the guttering lantern light. The badge came away wet with water, and something darker. "You tell me on the way. Can you stand?" They made it on the second try. Kane hauled him to the saddle and swung up behind. The cowboy slumped against his chest, all bony angles and tremors. Behind them, the wind worried at the cut rope, like a dog with a rag. The 2 dead men lay where they'd fallen, faces turned to drink the storm. On the run back, the rain hammered so hard, the world reduced to touch us and sound. The thud of hoof on mud, the slap of a loose stirrup, the cowboy's breath wheezing like a bellows with a torn seam. Twice he fought to pass out, and twice Kane brought him back with a knuckle jab to the shoulder. "Who wants you dead?" Kane asked over the din. "Not dead," Cole rasped. "Quiet. Name?" Cole swallowed hard. "Man who laughs like a file on iron. Smells of coal oil and bay rum. He—" The rest dissolved into a cough that sounded like fabric tearing. Mercer's livery loomed like a hulking shadow at the town's edge, blue paint flaking from the big doors. Lanterns burned low inside. As Kane angled past, a man's shape moved in the gloom, too quick to be innocent. A whiff of coal oil rode the rain and gone again. Lightning flared, enough for Kane to see a smear of that same blue paint on Cole's sleeve cuff, as if a hand had gripped him and dragged. He filed it. The night had a way of telling truths in small pieces. The gallows crouched at the square's far side like a spider, its beam black with wet. Chain clinked once on the wind. Kane tasted metal on his tongue. He kept the horse moving, carried the wounded man through the jailhouse door, and shouldered it shut. The little iron stove glowed dull red. Coffee tarred a dented pot. Deputy Rafe Dwyer looked up from behind the desk, slicker dripping on the floorboards, surprise and something else flickering under his eyes before he set them to concern. "Hell's own weather," Dwyer said. "You catch a fish or trouble?" "Both." Kane hauled Cole to the back cell and laid him on the cot. The man shivered in the lamplight, rope burn purpled, skin the color of paper. Kane unlocked his pocket kit, tore a strip of clean cloth, and worked whiskey into the wound at the temple. The liquor flared in the air, and Cole hissed like a brand in water. "Find Doc Leary," Kane told Dwyer. "Tell him to bring sutures and a steady hand." Dwyer hesitated a hair too long. "Doc won't ride in this. Ain't fit for a goat." "Then fetch him by the collar." Kane's tone cut through the stove's soft tick, and put word to Judge Hollis that I'll want a dawn statement. This man's under my protection. "Understood," Dwyer said, but the way his thumb worried the edge of his badge looked like a man anxious for more than weather. He pulled up his collar and vanished into the rain. Kane turned back to Cole. The man's eyes had cleared enough to show a hard-earned kind of fear. "They'll come," Cole said. Each word cost him. "No walls tall enough. You saved me from their rope, Sheriff, but they own the tall one in the square." Kane's jaw twitched. "Who's they?" Cole coughed as a spit red, shook his head. "I talk, I die bad. I keep shut. I maybe get a rope. Pick your hell." "Pick life," Kane said, and poured a capful of whiskey between the split lips. He worked quick. Bandage, water, another line of questions. Answers came in scraps. A poker game gone ugly. A shipment of script tokens that weren't supposed to see daylight. A back room in Hollis's Mercantile where coal oil lived beside ledgers. "Why string you from a tree?" Kane asked. "That's outlaw justice. If you'd cross the judge, you'd be signing paper, not sucking hemp." Cole's gaze slid to the barred window where rain ran like black beads. "You don't hang a man you mean to question. You hang a man you need to erase." The stove snapped softly as sap found fire. Thunder rolled its heavy shoulders. Kane's badge spun once on its chain. He stilled it with 2 fingers and stared at the lamplight in its star. He saw his wife's face there once, in another night of weather and choices. He shut that door. Bootfalls slapped the boardwalk outside. Not one set. Several. Voices conferred briefly, low and damp, a rumor of laughter with no warmth in it. Kane blew the lamp lower and moved to the front, Colt easy in his hand. He eased a shutter and peered through the slit. 3 figures, slickers, hats pulled low, crossed the street toward the square. One carried a coil of something thick over his shoulder, end dragging in the mud like a snake. They didn't glance at the jail. They didn't need to. Kane's first thought was to go, cross the rain and put his body between rope and beam. His second was heavier. He had a breathing man behind bars whose throat had already tasted hemp. He couldn't be in 2 places. Law demanded he secure his prisoner. Justice argued for his shadow on the gallows. He swore under his breath, a small word that held years. The wind shoved water under the door. The stove breathed out. He stepped back to the cell, checked the lock, double-checked the threaded key in his pocket, then shoved a chair under the knob to the hall, an old cavalry habit that had saved lives more than once. "You sleep," he told Cole, and the man managed a half-smile as if the joke had weight. "I'll be here." From the hall, the door opened again without knock. Dwyer returned, wet to the knees, hat dark with weather. "Doc's coming," he said. "He's hitching the mule." Judge's place was dark. "Good," Kane said, though the good felt thin. The 3 figures in the square had vanished into the black beyond the gallows. The chain whispered once more, as if the wind remembered a different night. Cole's gaze tracked Dwyer with a hunted man's radar. His voice lilted soft, meant only for Kane. He was there. He breathed. At the tree. I heard him cough. Same as now. Dwyer looked up at the whisper, all innocence. "Say something, Sheriff." Kane didn't answer him. He set his hat on the peg, unbuckled his gun belt slow, made a pillow of it on the desk where he could touch the Colt if the door breathed wrong. He wrote 2 lines on a scrap: Cole Avery, protective custody, no visitors, sheriff's order. He pinned it to the cell bar with a tack he carried under the bill of his hat. The rain moderated to a steady pour, gentler, more intimate. Somewhere out there, the 3 men finished whatever brought them to the square. Coal oil threaded the air for a heartbeat and was gone, replaced by the clean iron smell storms leave. Kane let his eyes stand guard while his body pretended to rest. Dwyer took the chair by the stove and removed his hat. In the red glow, his mustache shone with a faint bay gloss. His right hand, resting in his coat pocket, moved once, small, precise, like a man checking the shape of a key against his palm. Outside, the gallows pin turned on silent grease, and the rain wrote its long letter to the empty street. By mid-morning, the stormlight had faded into a thin, pewter day. News moved quicker than wagons. Women at the pump stopped mid-gossip, buckets dangling. The blacksmith flattened a horseshoe, and his hammer missed the anvil by a hair. Boys in caps craned for a look at the square, then ran, shouting what boys always shout when they don't understand the shape of a tragedy. In the bakery window, a curl of steam fogged the glass, and behind it Mrs. Sutter crossed herself twice. The gallows stood in the center like a lesson someone had underlined. "Saved him at dusk," the barber said, stropping a razor he'd stopped seeing. "Found him hung at dawn." "Reckon guilt does that to a man," the feed clerk answered, not sounding convinced. "Reckon the sheriff took sides," Eli Barrow's foreman put in. "Wrong ones." Sheriff Kane heard the words without stopping to collect them. He walked from the jail to the square, as if the street were a creek, and he'd sussed the stepping stones. Coal oil clung to damp boards near the steps of the gallows, faint and particular. He ran a glove across the beam, came away with a whisper of grease. The pin turned easy as a whistle. Someone had taken their time shaving the hinge and rubbing it smooth. Thoughtful murder. He lifted his eyes. On the courthouse roof, the same 2 crows watched, feathers wet and slick, heads ticking like black metronomes measuring a town's heart. Behind Kane, the undertaker cleared his throat. "Judge Hollis wants the body, Sheriff, for sanctity." "Sanctity can wait," Kane said. "Truth rides first." He turned back through the watching faces. A girl with windburned cheeks and a freckled nose stood in the crowd, hat too big, coat borrowed. She held his look. "You saved him," she said, with a kind of anger that came from fear. "My pa said you ain't supposed to pick a side." "I picked a man with a rope on his neck," Kane said, voice even. "That's a side I'll keep picking." The girl nodded, certain and pale. Her mother dragged her away. Inside the jail, Doc Leary had arrived at last and stood over the shrouded body in the back cell, spectacles fogged with his own breath. He was 60 and soft around the middle, but his hands had the memory of steadiness. He peeled back cloth, and a smell like pennies and rain rose up. "Neck's crushed proper," the doctor said, lifting the jaw with 2 fingers. "But look at the bruising at the ankles, rope marks. He was trussed again after you cut him loose. See here? Fresh." He pointed to half-moons of grit under one fingernail, coal cinders, and this. He touched the corner of the lip. "Wax, bay, unless my nose grew dumb overnight." Kane showed him the script token he'd clicked off the dead man's palm. Hollis Mercantile, payable in goods. Pitch-smeared one edge like a thumbprint that had been too sure of itself. You smell bay in the judge's office? Leary's mouth twitched. On the man and half this town of men who wish they were him. Bootsteps on the boardwalk, 3 men's worth. Judge Hollis filled the doorway like a verdict, that scarf coiled, a little perfect, as the knot that had stolen a life. Eli Barrow came with him, and Deputy Dwyer flanked them, hat low, face arranged to fit both winds. Dwyer's mustache carried the barest gloss. His right hand sat in his coat pocket like it lived there. "Sheriff," Hollis said, voice silk-backed with wire, "we'll need to reclaim Mr. Avery for proper handling. Suicide. Ugly. But the corridor of law is narrow. No need to parade this." Kane didn't move away from the cell. The keys rested cold along his palm. He felt their teeth without looking, like a man who can read by touch. It wasn't suicide. Barrow laughed once. Dry. "You were there, Sheriff?" At his last thought. "I was there when a shaved pin didn't squeal." Kane kept his gaze on Hollis, and saw only the reflection of himself in old court glass. "I was there when I cut a man down, and the rope marks at his ankles weren't there yet. I was there when I smelled coal oil in the rain." Dwyer let his breath out slow, made to smile, didn't. "You're stitching a shirt from threads, Sheriff. Folks are cold. Best not clothe them in fear." "Best not clothe a murder in calm," Kane said. The doctor coughed and took a strategic step toward the wall. Hollis laced gloved fingers. "Be reasoned, Kane. You play this loud, and you put a rope in men's mouths. I'll open an inquiry this afternoon. You have my word." Kane thought of how words behaved when stacked near power. They leaned the way a fence did when a bull tested it. Nightly. He tucked the keys away. "The body's evidence. The jail holds it until I say." Hollis's smile yellowed. "You're out on a limb, Sheriff. Don't cut it with your own hand." When they'd left, the doctor replaced the sheet. He adjusted his wire frames with a forefinger and looked Kane in the face. "You keep this up. We're going to learn which way this town tips." "It already tipped," Kane said. "Only folks are pretending they didn't feel it." He stepped back outside and into sound. The square had thickened. Ranch hands with wet hats, shopkeepers with aprons still on, a teamster with cracked knuckles and a habit of looking at his boots. The gallows was a magnet and men were filings. Hollis had set himself a few steps up on the courthouse stoop, speaking about peace and decency and letting grief be private. The words were good ones. They were also a curtain. "Sheriff," called a voice Kane knew. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house, strong as twine. "You think that cowboy was innocent?" Kane let the question sit in the cold air, watched it gather frost. "I think he was hanged by hands that don't belong to the wind. That's enough innocence to work with." Eli Barrow's foreman barked a laugh, or hung because he cut the wrong purse. A drifter swings, and the street sweeps clean. Kane's badge spun once, and he caught it between finger and thumb. It flashed dull in the gray like a worn coin that still bought something. A drifter is a man who hasn't been invited to sit. That's not a crime in any code I ever read. He moved through them like a ship through winter reeds. Near the livery, blue paint flaked from the jam in strips, fine enough to ride a breeze. He tasted grit on the air, tried the side door. It held. Through the crack, he smelled coal oil, sweet and old, and the funk of damp hay. In the dim, he made out a tin with shaved pin grease, lid dented in the same way the gallows pin had been planned. Somebody'd used the same hand for both chores. A scuff of boot heel showed in a puddle, nails set in a pattern that matched the farrier's habit out at Barrow's place. Number 3 nails set a notch wide. He took it all in quick, the way men take the size of a room when they know they may have to fight in it. A horse snorted in a rear stall. Something moved beyond it, no bigger than a man's shadow, faster. Kane shouldered the door. It resisted, then gave with a rasp of wood on warped wood. By the time he got inside, the back door banged once and light knifed the gloom, then died. He picked up the tin and set it back where it had been. He didn't need to hold a man's tools to prove they existed. He needed to make a man bring them out himself. When he stepped into the street again, a paper slapped his chest. The printer's boy, splotched with ink, shoved a wet broadside at him. Kane saves stranger. Stranger swings. The headline bellowed in heavy type. Beneath it, the second line brought a chill he felt all the way to his boots. Judge to hold inquest. Deputy Dwyer assumes temporary duties pending review. Kane looked up. The boy swallowed. "Mr. Pratt said to run it hot," he said. "Said folks ought to know who's minding the stove." "Much obliged," Kane said. The paper bled ink onto his glove. He read the small print, eyes moving without blinking. The judge had cited community calm and procedural decorum. Dwyer's name sat neat as a stamp below the words, acting authority in matters of public safety. The deputy stood across the way, listening to 3 men at once, smiling with the corners of his mouth, but not his eyes. When those eyes slid to Kane, they didn't slide far enough away to be accident. A gray-bearded rancher he half knew shoved forward, brandy on his breath at this hour. "Tell it plain, Kane," he said. "Was the boy a thief? My cousin's place lost a string of colts last week." "I'll tell it plain," Kane said. "He was a man with a rope on his throat and breath in his chest. Last night I chose the breath. Today I'll choose the truth." "Truth?" Barrow said, strolling near enough to smell like mint and iron. "Truth's what the town can sleep under." "Truth's a blanket don't care whose feet stick out," Kane said softly. Thunder, far off, reminded everyone the storm wasn't finished with the hill country. The crowd broke and reformed in smaller knots. A few hats tipped. More didn't. Preacher Tally, thin as fence wire, came up with his Bible tucked under his arm. "I'll say a service," he offered, voice dry as paper. "Words for the dead soothe the living." "They can wait," Kane said. "My words go to the living who made him dead." Tally nodded once, disappointed in a holy way. "Lawman," he said, not unkindly, and moved on. Doc Leary caught Kane's sleeve. "You'll need to eat," he said, practical. "Even hounds need meat." "I've had worse mornings," Kane said. "Then you're due a worse noon." The doctor's eyes slid past Kane to the judge's door. "Mind the blade, you can't see." Kane crossed toward the jail again and saw what the wind had left him at the threshold. A noose lay coiled on the step like a sleeping snake, clean and new, its slip neat, its tag end just long enough to practice. Tied at the eye was an iron script token with a pitch smear, Hollis Mercantile, looking up from the metal like a dare. He bent, turned the token with one gloved finger. The pitch shined wet, as if laid in the last hour. He straightened and stepped inside. The jail smelled of hot iron and damp wool and whiskey in a corked bottle. At the back he drew the bolt, turned the key, and felt nothing. He looked down at his hand. The key he'd pocketed was gone. In its place, cold and familiar, sat a second script token. His badge, tugged once against his vest chain, a little pendulum marking the moment. From the doorway came Deputy Dwyer's easy voice, warm as a stove you couldn't see the fire in. "Judge sent me to relieve you, Sheriff," he said, his right hand deep in his coat, where a man might keep either a comfort or a weapon. "Town's nerves are all a jangle. Best we mind 'em gentle." Kane met his eyes and watched them give away nothing at all. "And if I don't feel like being relieved?" he asked. Dwyer's thumb moved in his pocket. The sound it made, a small, certain click, was the exact sound the gallows pin had made in the dawn. The night was heavy with dust and silence. Sheriff Kane sat alone in his office, lamplight flickering against the jailhouse walls. The silver badge spun slowly between his fingers, catching flashes of gold flame. He had saved a cowboy from certain death in the storm, but by morning that same man swung lifeless from the gallows beam. The town called it justice. Some whispered it was suicide, but Kane's gut told him different. The chair creaked as he leaned back, eyes narrowing on the black square of night beyond the window. In his mind's eye he still saw the cowboy's face, drawn with fear, as if he had known what was coming. Kane's instincts had been sharpened by years of riding the edge of law and chaos. This wasn't chance. Somebody had strung that boy up, and somebody inside his own ranks had helped it happen. Whispers in the dust. By morning, rumors swirled through Cedar Ridge like dry leaves in the wind. Folks spoke in hushed voices on porches and at the water trough. Some said the cowboy had confessed sins too black to tell. Others muttered that Kane himself had chosen the wrong man to save, tarnishing the law with blood. And yet, one thread bound the whispers together. Deputy Crowley's name surfaced too often to ignore. Crowley was Kane's longest-serving deputy, a man with a soldier's bearing, but eyes that slid away too quick when pressed. Kane had noticed the little things, records gone missing, patrol routes adjusted, and Crowley too often arriving late with dust on his boots and no story worth telling. Betrayal has a scent, and Kane smelled it like smoke before a fire. The evidence surfaces. That afternoon, Kane walked the back trail where the cowboy had been ambushed days earlier. The wind cut sharp against his coat, whipping grit into his scarred jawline. He found fresh hoofprints, deep and deliberate, circling the ambush site. The size and nail marks matched horses from the sheriff's own stable. His jaw tightened. Later, behind the jailhouse, he caught young Deputy Harris fumbling with a ledger book. The boy's face flushed as Kane's shadow fell across him. Inside the book, Kane found a page torn hastily out. Yet the imprint of the writing remained. Leaning close to the lamplight, he traced the words with a calloused finger. Payment received. Silence kept. See. The single letter burned in Kane's mind. Crowley. The confrontation. Kane found Crowley at dusk, leaning against the saloon rail with whiskey on his breath and too much ease in his stance. The street was quiet, townsfolk sensing the storm about to break. Kane stepped into the lamplight, boots heavy on the boards, his voice low and iron-edged. "Deputy," he said, steel-gray eyes cutting through the haze. "We need to talk." Crowley straightened, hand drifting near his holster. "'Bout what, Sheriff?" "'Bout why a man I saved ends up swinging the next morning. 'Bout why a page goes missing from my records. And 'bout why your horse's tracks lead straight to where the ambush was laid." The words struck harder than any bullet. Crowley's grin faltered, but he covered it quick, spitting in the dust. "Careful, Kane. That sounds like an accusation." Kane's badge glinted in the firelight from the saloon. "It's the truth, and you know it." Truth in shadows. Crowley laughed, a hollow sound, then leaned close enough Kane could smell the rot gut on his breath. You think you're the law here, Kane? You ain't. The ranchers, the judge, the ones with gold in their pockets, they pull the strings. That cowboy knew too much. If I hadn't silenced him, someone else would've. Better his neck than mine. The admission dripped with venom. Kane's hand itched toward his Colt, but he held steady, voice dropping to a whisper that cut sharper than any shout. You sold the law for silver, and you'll answer for it. Crowley smirked, yet his eyes betrayed fear. You can't touch me. The town won't back you. They'll bury you before they bury me. The choice. Kane could feel the weight of the badge in his palm, heavier than lead. If he exposed Crowley now, he risked tearing the law apart before the very people it was meant to protect. If he stayed silent, justice would rot from the inside. It was a noose either way. The street had grown still. The lantern light painted both men in gold and shadow, their breaths visible in the chill night air. Finally, Kane spoke words that froze the town in silence. Law ain't always justice, he said, voice low and final, but justice rides with me. His hand hovered near the Colt, not yet drawn, but ready. The courthouse bell tolled noon, though the sky held no sun. Clouds hung low and sullen, pressing a dim pall over Cedar Ridge. Sheriff Kane strode across the square, boots grinding on grit, his duster dragging a whisper behind him. In the courthouse windows, shadows shifted, ranchers, clerks, men of power gathering like wolves in a den. The gallows loomed silent at the square's heart, its fresh rope swaying as if remembering. Kane's badge felt hot against his chest, though the air carried a knife's-edge chill. Every step was watched. Storekeepers stood idle, loaves uncut, nails unhammered. Folks leaned in doorways, whispering his name like it was both curse and prayer. He'd walked into gunfights and ambushes before, but never had the weight of a whole town pressed so hard on his shoulders. Inside, the courthouse air stank of tobacco and lamp oil. Judge Hollis sat high at his bench, scarf neat, hair slick. To his left lounged Elias Barrow, boots polished to shine, hat tipped forward like he owned the ceiling above them. Deputies stood along the wall, 3 in all, though the one Kane trusted least, Crowley, was absent. The absence cut louder than presence. Sheriff Kane, Hollis began, his voice smooth as creek stone. We convene not to condemn, but to clarify. Your actions have raised unrest. The death of Cole Avery must not fracture this town's peace. Kane stopped in the middle of the room, coat dripping rain. He let silence work its weight before he answered. Peace built on a hanging without trial is no peace. It's fear in a borrowed coat. Barrow chuckled, a dry rasp. You talk high, Sheriff, but you forget. Men like that cowboy stir dust best left settled. He wasn't one of us. He was trouble. He was alive when I cut him down, Kane said. His voice carried iron, and dead when the sun rose. That don't square, not by law nor conscience. Hollis leaned forward, eyes sharp as a hawk's. The town believes it was suicide. You'd have them think otherwise? You'd sow discord in already barren soil? Kane reached into his pocket and laid the script token on the judge's bench. Its pitch smear gleamed dark. That coin came from his hand. Your mercantile stamp smelled of bay wax. Tell me why a dying man grips your token like salvation. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Hollis's lips tightened before he composed himself. Merchandise passes many hands, Sheriff. It proves nothing. Maybe. Kane's eyes shifted to the deputies. But I got more. Rope burns on his ankles, fresh after I'd cut him free. Coal cinders under his nails. Rope grease on the gallows pin. That ain't a man tying his own noose. That's someone making sure he don't speak. The room grew colder. Barrow straightened, his voice rough with threat. Careful, Kane. You're poking at men bigger than you. You want to keep that badge? Know when to bow. Kane lifted the badge, spun it once on its chain, and let it glint before catching it. This star ain't for bowing, it's for standing. Law ain't your cudgel. The deputies shifted, boots creaking. One rested a hand too close to his revolver. Hollis raised a palm to still them, though his jaw ticked. You tread thin ice. Think of the townsfolk, their livelihoods. Order must be maintained. Order? Kane barked, sudden thunder in his tone. Order is men like Avery swinging silent, so your ledgers stay clean. Order is a deputy taking coin to betray his oath. Gasps prickled the gallery. A woman clutched her shawl tighter. A boy's voice whispered, "Betrayal." Before being hushed, Hollis's eyes narrowed. You accuse without proof. Kane stepped closer, every line of him dangerous stillness. I got proof enough. Crowley's boots matched tracks at the ambush. A ledger page torn with his initial. He laughed to my face about silencing men. You tell me if that ain't proof. The judge's knuckles whitened on his gavel. Barrow half rose, fists clenched. You put lies on a man who serves this town. You'll answer for it. Kane's Colt stayed holstered, though his hand brushed the pearl grip like a promise. I'll answer when the truth's done speaking. The air in the courthouse thickened. Folks shifted, torn between fear of Hollis's power and faith in Kane's steel. For a moment, the world balanced on a knife. Then, the doors slammed open. Deputy Crowley stepped in, dripping rain, eyes wild. He looked not at Kane, nor Hollis, but at the crowd. He's lying, Crowley bellowed, pointing at Kane. The sheriff's covering his own tracks. I seen him meet with Avery that night. Maybe he strung him up himself. Gasps rattled the rafters. Hollis seized the chance like a snake striking. You see, Sheriff, even your men question you. For the town's safety, I hereby suspend you from duty. The gavel cracked wood like a gunshot. Kane didn't flinch, his eyes locked with Crowley's, reading the sweat under the bravado, the twitch of guilt. Then he turned back to Hollis. Suspend me if you dare. Badge or no badge, I'll dig until the earth gives up every lie buried under it. He pinned the badge to the bench with his palm, the silver star gleaming under lamplight. The sound of metal on wood echoed like judgment. You can take this, he said, low and final, but you can't take justice. For a heartbeat, silence ruled the hall. Then a shot rang outside. Shouts split the air, panic flooding through the windows. Someone yelled, "Fire at the gallows." Kane's head snapped toward the door, instincts alive. Smoke already curled past the frame. The gallows, symbol of control, was burning. The judge rose in fury. Barrow swore loud enough to shake dust from the beams. But Kane saw only opportunity in the blaze. He grabbed his Colt, eyes cold steel. Looks like the town just chose its trial by fire, he said, and he walked toward the smoke, leaving law behind and carrying justice like a drawn gun. Flames climbed the gallows like they'd been waiting their turn. Pitch snapped, rope hissed, sparks lifted into the low clouds and came back as ash snow. Sheriff Kane shouldered through the crowd, smoke filling his lungs with the bitter taste of judgment. A child screamed near the steps. Kane snatched her clear and thrust her into her mother's arms without breaking stride. The beam cracked, one last complaint from timber that had done too much speaking. Beyond the blaze, a coat tail flashed into the alley, dark slicker dusted with a pale blue grit that looked a lot like Mercer's flaking livery paint. Kane's eyes hardened. He wheeled, vaulted the hitch rail, and tore into the night. His horse took the corner in a shower of wet gravel. The square fell behind, shouts, bell, flames, replaced by the hush of empty side streets, and the rhythm of hooves beating Law into the mud. The moon was a silver coin caught in ragged cloud. Coal oil rode the wind like a rumor. He followed it. Mercer's livery crouched at the edge of town, doors gapped like bad teeth. A low lantern burned inside. Shadows moved with purpose, not panic. Kane slid from the saddle at a run, Colt loose in his hand, breath pluming white. The smell hit him first. Lamp fuel, horse sweat, hot iron, and the waxy tang of greased hemp. He stepped into the glow. "Evening," he said softly, voice carrying like a knife. "Drop iron and live." 3 men froze around the rear stall, where a block and tackle hung from a rafter. One wore a butcher's apron stippled with pitch. Another had a rasp in his hand, the length of a law book. The third held a coil of rope, the color of October straw, ends waxed and neat. No masks, just men who thought a stable at midnight was private enough. The rasp man moved first. Kane's colt bucked once. The rasp clanged against a stall post, and the man folded, rasp skittering through straw. The apron lurched for a pistol, too slow. The rope hand threw his coil like a lariat for Kane's gun wrist, fast and practiced. Hemp bit his forearm, the coil yanked. His shot went wide and blew the lantern against a post. Glass burst. Oil blossomed into a sheet of flame, shadows turning to moving walls. The horses screamed. Kane went with the pull instead of against it, drove forward, shoulder first, into Rope Hand's chest. They hit the feed bin. The man's teeth clicked. He scrabbled for a knife. Kane twisted the coil, flipped it, and jerked hard. The loop snapped shut on the man's wrists with the tidy certainty of a hangman's tie. He kicked the knife away and came up into smoke. The apron was crawling for his pistol. Kane pinned the man's wrist with his boot and felt the bones give way like dry sticks. The man howled. Kane put the colt's cold nose to his sweating brow. "Talk." "Crowley." The man spat through ash. Said shave the pin, grease the hinge, rig the beam. Said make it sing silent. "And Avery?" Kane's voice could have cooled steel. Crowley and a ranch hand brung him to the square at night like freight. No one wanted to bill. We did the rest. God's truth. He gagged on smoke, coughed up cinder. Paid from Hollis's drawer, pitch and coin both. Kane's eyes slid to the workbench. A tin of pin grease, dented like the gallows hinge, sat beside a brush, still wet. A ledger lay open, ink wavering where a page had been ripped. The top line remained, pressed by a hard-nibbed hand. See 2 nights' watch after storm. Under it, in a smaller, neater script, from B's agent, 5 head transferred. Barrow. Always Barrow. Fire climbed a halter rope and licked toward a hayrick. Kane grabbed the ledger, shoved it inside his duster, hauled Rope Hand up by the tied wrists, and dragged both him and the apron to the door by their collars. Outside, the night sucked the smoke off him like a thief. The third man moaned once and didn't move again. Kane whistled sharp. His horse came. He looped the coil around Rope Hand's bound wrists, hitched him to the horn like a sack of truths, and shoved the apron down into a water trough, breaking the flames off him with a hiss. Then he vaulted up, eyes on the dark beyond the livery, toward the river road and the black line of barrows spread. He didn't look back at the burning stable. Some fires you fed or starved. This one had eaten what he needed. They rode into the open country where the prairie becomes suggestion under moonlight. Wind cut low and mean, brush clawed at his boots like hands begging. The bound man stumbled and half ran to save his shoulders from coming loose. Kane didn't waste mercy or cruelty. He set a pace a guilty man could survive if he chose to live. At the river ford, they met the first of Barrow's night riders, two silhouettes breaking from the cottonwoods, lantern-hooded, shotguns laid easy across their thighs. "Roads closed," one called, voice thick with confidence. "Eli don't want visitors." Kane didn't slow. "Tell Barrow the law's calling after hours." "Law's suspended," the other said, grin in the words. Kane saw the gun muzzles lift. He leaned from the saddle and shot the lantern. The world went dark and beautiful. His second shot took the nearer horse at the shoulder. It crashed and flung its rider. The shotgun boomed wild, tore a branch above. Kane's third shot cut the other man's hat clean and shaved hair and pride. The riders chose to live. They vanished into river shadow, curses trailing. He put his horse to the ford. Water climbed his boots and sucked at the cinch. The bound man stumbled and went to his knees. Kane kept him moving by rope alone. On the far bank, the Barrow Ranch spread like a low city of blacker dark. Bunkhouse coals banked, windmill creaking. A line shack crouched near a stand of elm. A lamp moved between the tack room and the big house. Small, quick, deliberate. Crowley's gait entered Kane's bones like a remembered song. Kane slid off in the shadow of a cistern. He lashed Rope Hand to the slats with a hitch you couldn't pick in a week and palmed a second gun from his boot. A cut-down Smith he kept for bad hallways and worse men. He tasted alkali, iron, old anger. He crossed the yard like a rumor. Around the tack house corner, he found a man he didn't know smoking with his back to the wall. The man's eyes widened to saucers. His hand drifted down. "Night, friend," Kane said, and the man found good reason to sleep on the ground. Kane eased past. Inside the tack room, leather and oil and horse made a church of scent. A lamp haloed a man's shoulders at a workbench. Crowley turned as if he'd felt the draft and smiled like they were at a church picnic. "Sheriff, not tonight," Kane said. "Tonight I'm the man you forgot died once already." Crowley's gaze flicked to the open door, to the window, to the low shelf where a sawed-off lay under a horse blanket. He lifted his hands, slow, bar showman easy. "You're a step late. Hollis suspended you. Barrow owns the night. Me? I was set to ride at dawn." He tapped a folded paper on the bench, bold as brass. "Confession from Avery. Handy, ain't it?" Kane didn't look down. "I saved Cole Avery. He didn't tie his legs. He didn't grease a hinge. He didn't die for his own convenience." Crowley's smile thinned. "He died quiet. That's kindness coming from me." The cut-down Smith roared once. The shelf exploded into splinters and threw the hidden shotgun into the wall with a clatter. Crowley flinched as wood stung his cheek. "Move again," Kane said, calm as a winter river, "and I'll put you where the undertaker don't waste paint." Crowley's mask cracked. Under it was a tired fear and something like hate. "You don't get it," he hissed. "The judge writes the truth. Barrow banks it. I just carry the notes. Then you can deliver one more, Kane said, and stepped in. He spun Crowley by the collar, shoved him to the floor, and snapped iron shackles around his wrists, the old cavalry kind, heavy as a sermon. Crowley writhed. The irons kissed bone. Kane hauled him to his feet. A voice cut from the doorway, cool and bright as water on a blade. You don't leave this yard, Kane. Hollis stood outside the threshold like a silhouette inked by lamplight, scarf tidy, hair oiled, a Henry leveled casual as a finger. Beside him, Eli Barrow held his own calm like a dog's chain. Behind them, a half-circle of men formed from shadows, muzzles catching moon with starry glints. Boots shuffled in cool dirt. Metal breathed. Let him go, Hollis said, like he was telling someone to pass the salt. In the morning we'll say you were overwrought. A man of feeling. You get your badge back in a month. The town sleeps. Everyone wins. Crowley turned, eyes seizing that hope, like a drowning man grabs a log. Take it, Kane, he urged, breathless. Hang a nobody for the crowd. Let me walk. Kane's jaw tightened. He could feel the badge he'd left on the judge's bench like a cold absence on his chest. The irons in his fist felt like an answer. Law ain't always justice, he said, voice low enough that it lived in the space between words. But justice rides with me. Hollis sighed as if disappointed in a slow student. So be it. The Henry's hammer notched back, a clear clicking consent to violence. Eli? Barrow gestured. Rifles came up like wheat in a wind. Kane made the kind of choice that leaves a line behind it. He shoved Crowley bodily into the doorframe, used the deputy's stocky carcass as a shield, and fired twice into the lantern perched over Hollis's shoulder. Glass burst. Flame leapt up the judge's scarf and bit it into smoke. Men cursed and scattered. Barrow's first shot carved splinters from the lintel near Kane's ear. The second found Crowley's side. The deputy screamed and sagged in the irons. Kane hooked an arm through the chain and hauled him hard into the yard. They moved like a single wounded beast, Kane dragging, Crowley dragging him back, bullets furring the night. He found the corner where the cistern shadow thickened, flung Crowley across a saddle, and slapped leather like he meant to kill the horse with work. The animal lunged. The bound man's head knocked against the horn with a sound like a gavel. Shouts flew. Hooves clattered. A rifle boomed and tore a button off Kane's coat with the delicacy of a tailor. He felt warmth spill along his ribs. He didn't look down. They cleared the yard. The windmill spun its cross over them like a blessing or a curse. Kane cut for the willows, the river hissing black under starlight. Behind, Barrow's riders gave chase. 3, 4, maybe 5, their lanterns bobbing like wicked fireflies. He put the horse into the ford blind, trusting remembered stones and old cavalry sense. Around smacked water close enough to salt his face with river. He leaned low over Crowley's groaning back and rode the current like a thief rides luck. They gained the far bank, with the night riding hard on their heels, up the cut bank, through sage that slapped like whips, over a deadfall that bit at a fetlock and lost. Cedar Ridge's lamps showed at last, a scatter of tired stars on earth. The burned gallows smoked against the sky like a black tooth. Crowley coughed blood and laughed together. You ain't got the town, Kane. You ain't got the law. You got nothing but me. When morning comes, they'll cut you down, same as Avery. Morning comes for everybody, Kane said. They hit the back lane behind the undertakers, slid into shadow, and let the horse breathe steam into the cold. Kane listened to the night, men hunting, men losing courage, the sound of metal settling in cooling barrels. The riders fanned wide, then pulled back. No one wanted the jailhouse street with a sheriff in it, even a suspended one, not in the dark. He felt their fear like weather changing. He leaned close to Crowley's ear. "You got a choice," he murmured. "Speak it at dawn in the square, loud enough for God to write it down, or I can lay your silence at the judge's door like a dead snake." Crowley's breath jittered. "You drag me out there, I'll die either way." Kane tightened the shackles until iron bit scream out of him, then pick the death that ruins the men who paid for yours. The deputy closed his eyes. "There's a ledger in Hollis's safe," he whispered finally, voice thin. "Back room, behind the law books. False drawer. Every dollar from Barrow and the freighters. Names, dates, mine. Yours if they can get it." He laughed again. More blood than mirth. "You're already a ghost, Kane." "Maybe," Kane said. He shifted in the saddle, winced at the wet along his ribs. Ghosts knocked too. He heeled the horse. The square opened before them, empty save for embers and a gallows stump still smoking. Frost silvered the boardwalks like winter had come, while men argued. He swung down, hauled Crowley after, and dragged him step by step across the frost toward the black post where the rope had sung silent. Each link of the shackles clicked like a clock counting. Dawn brushed the far hills with pewter. Doors creaked. Shadows gathered into faces at windows. The town woke to a vision. Sheriff Kane, coat torn and dark with blood, hauling a shackled deputy toward the place where justice had burned. He threw Crowley against the stump. The deputy slid down it, breath fogging, eyes wide as a colt's. Kane planted his boots, lifted his colt, so the whole square could see the idea of it. Somewhere behind him, in the blue dark that hadn't decided to be day, a dozen rifles whispered into readiness. A voice Kane knew like a taste spoke, smooth and close, from the edge of the bank dash. "Sheriff," Judge Hollis said pleasantly, as if ordering eggs, "lay down your gun, or we start this morning with you." Kane didn't turn. He stared at Crowley, at the rope's black kiss on the beam above, at the crowd that would have to decide what they believed when belief became dangerous. "Choose," the judge said, steel under silk now, "your life or your truth." The hammer of a rifle completed its arc, small and clean in the dawning cold, and the wind lifted a cinder that landed, soft as a kiss, on Kane's bare hand where the badge used to live. Dawn came blood-red. The horizon flared like a wound as Sheriff Kane rode into Cedar Ridge, dragging Deputy Crowley at the end of a rope tied to his saddle horn. The outlaw deputy stumbled, wrists bound, face streaked with dust and fear. Behind them, the town stirred, doors creaking, curtains twitching, boots stepping cautiously into the square. The gallows still stood, black against the morning light, rope swaying gently like some vulture waiting to feast. It was the same gallows where Cole Avery had swung, the same timber that had made Kane question whether the law he carried was justice or just a tool wielded by powerful men. Kane hauled Crowley up the steps. The deputy cursed, his voice hoarse. "You think this makes you righteous, Kane? You'll hang with me before this day's done." Kane's steel-gray eyes cut through him, colder than the dawn air. He didn't speak. The badge in his hand spun slowly, catching light, gleaming like judgment. The crowd pressed closer, breathless. They weren't sure if they were watching their sheriff uphold the law or abandon it entirely. Judge Hollis appeared on the courthouse porch, face pale and furious. Elias Barrow and his ranchers flanked him, rifles glinting in the half-light. Hollis raised his gavel like it was a weapon. "Sheriff Kane, stand down. This man is a deputy of the law. He will be tried properly." "Properly?" Kane's voice thundered across the square. "Same as Cole Avery. Same as any man you needed gone. Your court's nothing but a scaffold in disguise." Gasps rippled through the townsfolk. Hollis reddened. Barrow stepped forward, spitting dust. "Kane, if you do this, you're no better than the men you claim to fight. You'll tear this town apart." Kane stared at the rope. His hand trembled, not from fear but from the weight of decision. Law said he should turn Crowley over. Justice whispered that Crowley's hands were already red with Avery's death, and no trial here would ever convict him. Crowley sneered, blood on his teeth. "Do it, Kane. String me up, then watch yourself fall next." The townsfolk murmured, torn between horror and hunger for justice. Mothers clutched their children. Old men whispered prayers. The badge spun once more in Kane's palm, catching the red sun like fire. Finally, he spoke, his voice low, rough as gravel. "Law ain't always justice, but justice rides with me." The words fell heavy. Final. He slipped the badge into his pocket. With his free hand, he pulled the lever. The trap door crashed open. Crowley dropped, rope snapping taut. The crowd cried out, some in shock, others in savage relief. The deputy kicked once, twice, then hung limp, silence swallowing his curses forever. Kane stood motionless, the dawn burning behind him. He felt the town's eyes pierce his back, some filled with gratitude, others with fear. By hanging Crowley himself, he had severed the last tie between his badge and the law it claimed to represent. Judge Hollis's voice quaked with fury. "You've damned yourself, Kane. You've turned executioner, not sheriff. This town will not forgive." Kane turned, his shadow long and sharp across the square. The town will decide. But justice has been done. He descended the gallows, leaving the deputy swinging. Every step echoed like a drumbeat of war. Mothers pulled their children close. Ranchers gripped their rifles, uncertain whether to raise them or lower their gaze. And yet, no one stopped him. No bullet sought his back. No hand reached for the gavel. For in that moment, Sheriff Kane was no longer just the lawman of Cedar Ridge. He was something harder, sharper, an avenger cut from the dust itself, walking a line between savior and devil. The gallows creaked behind him. The question lingered in every eye, unspoken but heavy as the morning sky. Had Sheriff Kane delivered justice or damnation? The wind carried no answer, only silence and the slow swing of a dead man's boots.